All right, we are recording this. It will be posted to YouTube. You'll also get a link emailed to you later of this recording. Uh, and we're going to go through about halfway through. We're going to go through some scenarios. We will be going through one scenario, but we've done two other scenarios in the other sessions that we've done this fall. So those scenarios, you can watch through those on YouTube. We'll also email you a link to the YouTube channel, and I can put that into the chat at the very end of today's session as well. Speaking of the end of today's session, I'm going to put in a survey link to a certificate of attendance survey. You'll be able to give us a little bit of feedback about the session, maybe some other topics that you might want to hear about, as well as putting in your information so that you get a certificate of attendance for today's session. The slides will also be available. We'll email those out to you after today's session. It might take a few days, especially with the holidays and things, so please be patient with us. I do have a handout that I will drop into the chat here about halfway through. And I do encourage you guys to use the Zoom chat as we're going through today's session, as well as the Q&A. If you have questions that maybe you want to ask and you'd like to ask them anonymously, you're able to do that in the Zoom Q&A. If you need closed captioning, that is available to you through Zoom. It works fairly well. We will try to enunciate so that it can pick us up as we're going through today's session, but please use that if you need. It should be in the Zoom ribbon at the bottom of your Zoom window. And the last piece here is that we are going to be using Mentimeter today. If you are not familiar with Mentimeter, it is a polling software. I will turn off my camera so you can get a hold of that QR code. If you've got a smartphone, you can use the QR code. You can also go to menti.com and enter in that 8-digit code that you see on the screen right now. That 8-digit code, as well as the website, will be on top of every slide. So if you're not sure, if you want to use Menti and then you decide that you do later on, you can always join at any time. We do appreciate everybody joining because it allows you guys to participate, and it also makes things a little bit more interesting for Lori and I. We get to interact with you guys a little bit more. Once you guys have logged in, if you can give a thumbs up, that lets me know that folks are able to log in and that things are working, and that you have gotten enough time to do that. I want to make sure that people have time to log in. If we're going through things as well here, let me just put the participation link into the chat just in case you need it. All right, looks like we've got quite a few of you have been able to join so far. So let me move on with our first question. What best describes your job? Oh, a question in the chat about certificates of attendance. I'll put a survey link in at the very end it'll be a SurveyMonkey link that will go in at the very end of today's session, right around 1 o'clock. All right, it looks like many of you are in the design world, but we do have a few administrative and a few who are describing their work as construction, and then quite a few who are in other. If you are in other and you're able to, I'd be curious to see in the chat, what does other mean? How would you describe? As I said, most of our audience is in that kind of road construction, road design, bridge construction, bridge design, that world. Oh, drinking water inspector, excellent. Welcome. I know we've got some folks from our GLIAC audience, that's the Great Lakes Environmental Infrastructure group. So I appreciate you guys joining us as well. A lot of this information is fairly universal, so. All right, so this is the next question that I've got here. People skills are they something that you're born with? Are they something that you learn? Or are they something that is kind of a combination of both?
Pretty unanimous.
Pretty unanimous. Yeah, it looks like most of our folks here are saying that it is a combination. All right, we've got another question for you. Let's see what you think about this. Are you guys familiar with any of the following here? This is the Myers-Briggs personality test. It's a 4-letter kind of code that goes with that. You might be familiar, like INFP or ENTJ, something like that. Are you familiar with Enneagrams, or have you ever heard of like a type A, type B personality? looks like we've got quite a few of you are familiar with these types of ideas. All right. We got one more question here. Has anybody in your life used their personality as an excuse for a lack of people skills? Your choices are yes, no, or maybe you're not sure.
And it could be you too.
Yes.
If you've
Have
used
you
it.
ever used,
Yeah.
ever used your personality as an excuse? It looks like, yes, this is a fairly universal
Mhm.
experience that folks have had. So, as we're going through today's session, um, one of the things that Lori and I wanted to highlight was that personality tests don't show your full potential. Do you want to expand on that a little bit?
Right. They're really consider them a snapshot of you in that moment on that day, right? We know what some days look like compared to others. So depending on the day that you took that test, you might be an introvert, you might be an extrovert, right? You might have shown your best side, you might have shown your worst side. So think of it from that perspective, that you and all those things about you are fluid. And that's the good news, is that the things that we're going to talk about today are things that you can decide to tweak and adjust and very actively point yourself at and challenge yourself to do things differently.
That's always been one of my issues with some of those personality tests is that they sometimes folks use them to put themselves into a box of, well, I'm an introvert, therefore I am not able to do a presentation, or I'm not able to have a meeting with other people, or other types of things, or I'm an extrovert and therefore that's why I talk over people, those types of things. So we want to make sure that you guys understand that, like Lori said, it's a snapshot of you in that moment. It isn't a concrete idea of who you are as a person. Um, and as Lori said, these people skills, they can be learned, and practice is going to make perfect. So that's what we're here today. That's why we've got some of these scenarios for you to choose from. All right, so people skills, they are something that you can learn, and they are something that you can improve. So Lori, do you want to talk maybe about that improvement of those people skills?
Sure, absolutely. I want you to think about people skills sort of like it's almost sounds magical or mystical, like, ooh, what are people skills? It's like some people have them, some people don't. How do you really identify or put your finger on what those things are? And what I want you to consider is that people skills sort of revolve around the principles of communication, dependability, and self-awareness. And so if you lean into any of those areas, you know, how good of a communicator you are, how dependable you are, and how self-aware you are, um, once you weave those all together, that's going to equal your ability at interacting with people and doing a good job at it. So as we get to the scenarios, you're going to see some of these themes of communication, dependability, and self-awareness come up. And I want you to be thinking about yourself too, and you know, where can you improve? Like, what's the easiest part for you? Are you an awesome communicator? Are you horribly rotten at dependability? Right? Let's start thinking about those things. But the idea is that they're rooted in specific things that you can change.
Yes.
It's not a mystery.
Yes. And also that they are, like any other skill, if you were practicing free throws, that is a skill. No matter how bad you start at, you can always get better at something. So let's shift this back to you guys and see what are some examples of some people skills. What do you guys think of when you think of people skills and eye contact, listening? Leading discussions, remembering names. A lot of these are really specific things. This is great. I like that, listening to understand and not just to respond. That is excellent. I know, Lori, you've talked a little bit about active listening is its own um, whole skill. We could do a whole presentation about that.
It's its own animal, and it's something that you have to learn, and it takes a while. And just the relatability is a good one to describe active listening. And is that a term that sounds familiar? Active listening from how is that different from listening? Any thoughts on that? We can just put it into the chat.
We've got some other ones. Patience, being respectful. I think personally, sometimes being respectful, sometimes folks, they they expect respect,
Mhm.
sometimes, and they don't always give respect. So that sometimes that can be a challenge, especially depending on the way that someone else is communicating with you, if they are communicating in a respectful manner or not. Making people feel comfortable, being thoughtful, amicable. These are all we're on the right track here.
So you can see that there's a lot of them that relate to communication, right? As one of the principles of good people skills. If we're looking at dependability, right? There's some things on the list that you talked about. Dependability is in there in some of the themes. We probably don't see very many about self-awareness. So we'll talk more about how that applies to people skills too.
All right. So, as Lori was talking about, these really come down to empathy and communication. Those are kind of two silos that a lot of the people skills fall under. They'll fall into one of those two. So, let's talk a little bit about empathy because I think that's something that sometimes folks get a little bit confused about. So, here's a quote or a definition, sorry, of what empathy is. It is the action of understanding, being aware of, being sensitive to, and vicariously experiencing the feelings, thoughts, and experience of another. So there's a lot of pieces and parts to that. But at its core, empathy is whether or not you can put yourself into somebody else's shoes or see the world through someone else's
Yeah.
eyes.
And that's probably the easiest way to understand it is to put yourself in their shoes. It's often confused for sympathy. So sympathy is something that's very different from empathy. Sympathy is what you're feeling. It's housed in you, so if you say, "Oh, I'm sorry that that happened," that's how you feel. You feel bad about something. Empathy is a communication skill where you're actually trying to observe the other person and understand what their inner world might be and then try and label it. And you're probably going to get it wrong sometimes. I still get it wrong. It's just sometimes you don't know, but without trying to label it and ask, no, well, Ingrid, you seem really upset right now. She
Like,
could be totally like,
I'm not
mad.
upset.
I'm not mad at all. Um,
This is just how my face looks.
that's me attempting to be empathetic, right? It's a communication skill to try and understand what's going on for Ingrid. But it has nothing to do with how I'm feeling. And that's the difference. Sympathy is about you.
Excellent. All right. So, some other things about empathy. Empathy isn't taking on everybody else's burdens. It isn't, trying to fix somebody else's problem. You can be empathetic without rushing in to try and fix whatever is wrong or however somebody feels. It also doesn't mean that you're never ever going to upset somebody else. You can be empathetic, and some people might still be upset with you. It also doesn't mean that you never disagree with anybody. You can have a disagreement and still be empathetic.
Mhm.
Um, all right. And then some things that empathy requires, it requires some curiosity for you to be able to think about what somebody else might be feeling, and some analysis of the situation as well. And like Lori said, you might analyze something a little bit wrong. That's, part of this.
Right. So visual cues are a big part of that analysis. When you're observing things out in the field, right, you're probably looking for specific things. When it comes to people, people display visual cues as well. And the tricky part is if you're reading them correctly, and that just takes practice.
And then empathy also requires some level of neutrality because how somebody else might experience a situation might not be how you
Mhm.
experience it. And that doesn't mean that either one of you are reacting wrong to however that situation is. It also can require some charitability that that person, whatever their reaction, isn't necessarily a malicious thing against you.
Mhm.
They're not reacting at you. They are maybe just reacting to
Okay.
whatever the situation is.
So you have to become, you know, very eager to put your own feelings to the side so that you are neutral in the moment. So you're not sort of clouding your own judgment of reading somebody through your own filter of like your own upset feelings or your own happiness or whatever it is. That can really discolor and make you pick the wrong thing if you're trying to understand somebody else. So when you can, being empathetic involves putting your own feelings off to the side, not because they're not valid, they probably are still valid. But it's for you to try and understand the other person, so you're not clouding that.
And I am an engineer. I have grown up with engineers, worked with engineers, went to school with engineers. And oftentimes I have heard, well, that isn't, however, that person is reacting to something that's not logical.
Mm.
And it's like, well, maybe not to
Yeah.
you, but that still is, can you see where they're coming from? Even if maybe you don't see them as being logical in the moment. Um, yes. All right. So, we want to talk a little bit too about some social norms because some of this is really helpful when we're talking about trying to put yourself in somebody else's shoes. So social norms are some expected behaviors. They can really differ between cultures, between locations, even, just within the Upper Peninsula versus downstate Michigan. Just the fact that I say downstate Michigan as opposed to the Lower Peninsula is one of those kind of social norms. People up here know what I'm talking about. Um, the age of someone can also really alter social norms. Things can shift over time. And the other piece of this is that social norms are learned behaviors. So they are something that you're not born knowing how to do. The culture around you kind of shapes what those might be. And that culture can be your the town that you grew up in, or the city that you grew up in, the neighborhood you grew up in, but it can also be, the religion that you grew up in, or the work office culture that you are in. I worked for 2 different offices within the same company, and the culture in both offices was very different. So there's lots of kind of nuance to some of these social norms. So what are some social norms what is an example of a social norm from your community? Something that is very normal for you, and also with social norms, it's something that's expected too. It's not just that it is normal behavior, but it might be that it's an expected behavior. And I think sometimes that can get folks not into trouble, but it can put people off if there is something that is an expected behavior that is not getting to know your neighbors, being outgoing naturally. Yeah, depending on where you live, knowing your neighbors' names versus not knowing them, whether you have a relationship where you can go borrow a cup of sugar, or you don't even know what their names are or who lives in that house. Arriving on time, being polite, saying please and thank you. A social norm that one of my cousins experienced is she's a nurse, and she worked in Texas, and she got written up for her work because she wasn't saying sir and ma'am to her patients, and they were very upset about the fact that she was just this rude person who wasn't saying sir and ma'am. But she grew up here in the Upper Peninsula, and it's not really part of our culture for people to say ma'am and sir. And so she had to get used to that new different social norm and adapt to that different culture. What are some of these other ones here? Smiling at strangers, greeting people you meet as you're walking along. Yeah, that is something that, I grew up here in a very rural place, and it is totally normal to say hello to absolute strangers. And then when I was in this city situation with a friend of mine, she was like, stop doing that. You are going to get us in trouble. Um, Pop versus soda. Yeah, just some of the terminology. Being open to conversations, whether you know them or not. Yeah, do you strike up a conversation with people when you're standing in line? Waving to people you meet on the road? Holding doors open for somebody. Somebody said that in the chat. Yes, that is a total social norm. Any others that we've got? All right, so these are some social norms that are normal to you and expected behavior. How about examples of some social norms that are normal in another community but not in yours? So what are some social norms maybe another part of the country, or maybe in another country or another culture from yours? Wearing a hijab, yes, that would be one. Being direct, yes, some cultures are much more direct than we are in America. Um, and it can be very off-putting to be in that situation because it seems blunt and rude to not obfuscate situations a little bit. Avoiding eye contact, um, not shaking hands. Yeah, other forms of greeting for sure. Um, agreeing if even if you don't agree, yes.
Not declining food, that can be a big one too.
Yes. Yeah, the differences in greetings between cultures, there are other cultures where it's very normal to give a business associate a peck on the cheek, whereas here that would be a little much for most folks. Bowing at introductions, uh, yeah, for sure. I even some other ones I know. I had read that in France it's considered really rude to bring a dessert. Like if you're going to somebody's house for dinner, it's really rude to bring dessert or to bring a bottle of wine. Because you are essentially telling the host that they didn't think things through enough to have a dessert ready
Mhm.
for you or to provide enough wine for the meal. Whereas here, that would be a really, really typical thing. Like
Mhm.
for me to go to somebody's house for a meal and not bring anything, oh, I
Mhm.
would feel very uncomfortable doing that.
Mhm.
Would feel very wrong, um even if somebody can't cook, it's like bring some napkins or a bag of ice or
Mhm.
something just so that you are participating in that meal. Respecting elders, whether they respect you back or not, yes. Being blunt, yeah, or softening the blow with things. Yeah, not helping the hostess with dishes or cleanup after the meal. Sometimes that is, depending on culture, can be really seen as an insult as well. Um, Either way, either you
Mhm.
didn't help or
Mhm.
you did help. How dare you help me? I am perfectly capable of keeping my own home.
Or it can be just a family thing,
Yes,
you
yes.
know?
Yes. All right. So, talking about communication, we want to make sure that we're getting our message across to somebody and making sure that we are hearing the message that is coming to us. So, when we're talking about communication, there are lots of pieces to this. The appropriate tone for something. You could say the same exact words using a different tone, and it can come across completely different. Is this the right time and place to have this particular conversation or this communication? Are you clear with your message and with your words? And do you have an understanding of the situation? So, is there anything else that you would like to add to this with communication?
Well, if we're thinking about the social norms, we're navigating all of those almost like landmines all the time. And so trying to, figure out what's right in each situation for tone and time and place and clarity is really dependent on understanding the situation. So that's why we talk so much about communication, because it isn't just, I'm just going to tell you how I feel. There's way more to it than that. And I'm sure that you can think of times in your life where you've had a bad interaction with somebody regarding communication, where maybe they overshared or they didn't consider their tone or their time and place was really poorly timed. And that's why we got to point out the specifics of the things you can control, so that as you go forward, look at what makes you a good communicator and what could you change? What could you work on?
Yeah, that time and place is one of the big ones, right after somebody has made a mistake is probably not the time to say I told you so
Mhm.
or we talked about how that might have happened.
Mhm.
Maybe pause and let
Mhm.
people process through that before you point out maybe how this could have been prevented. All right, so we have some scenarios here to go over today. There is one of the scenarios, which is a face-to-face with a customer. There's also indirect virtual communication. So maybe you're posting like on Teams or Slack or on a forum that's within your organization. Face-to-face with a manager and an employee and face to face with an employee and an employee, or face to face with an aggressive customer. And what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to drop into the chat this PDF of these scenarios so you'll be able to kind of follow along with things. This will be sent to you in an email after the fact. So um, you will have access to this in the future. And we'll give you just a little bit more time. All right, so you're going to be a little bit disappointed with this. So the most popular one here is face to face with a manager and employee, and then the second most popular is face to face with an aggressive person. So we've already done those two scenarios in our previous two sessions of this. So we are going to do one of the other three sessions, or one of the other three scenarios. So between indirect virtual and face-to-face employee and employee, if we get a bump in one of those, we'll go with that one. To help you out though, because I know that you probably want to know about those situations. We do have those sessions are recorded. They're posted on our YouTube channel. At the end of today's session, I'll drop that in the email with all of the post session information. You'll also get a link to the YouTube page. What I've done is I've posted in the description of the YouTube video the timestamp for when we start talking about the scenarios, so you can go and watch those at your leisure and get that information. But this way we get a little bit of extra. So it looks like face-to-face employee and employee is the winner here. So Lori, do you want to set up what this situation is?
Okay, so if you've decided to open the PDF that she put in the chat, this is going to be scenario number 4. And so this could be your coworker, this could be a colleague, this could be somebody that is a contractor that comes into your office frequently. This is just somebody that they may not be your official coworker, but they're somebody that you have to get work done with on occasion. Okay, so and the situation, I guess, to tee it up is that you need something from them to get your work done. And when you go up to engage them in a conversation about, hey, I got this thing that I need, and I have to get this task done, that instead of answering your question, they go into something very personal. You might have experienced this yourself already, something that you really didn't want to get an earful of. Okay, so and in that moment you're uncomfortable and you don't know what to do. Okay, so what we're going to talk about then is what not to do, what would be a good response, and what would be an even better response, like what would be the best response. And so oftentimes it's easiest to think about what not to do. So we'll just start there. So if you guys have any ideas and you want to put them in the chat about what not to do.
That would be what not to do. Yes, that is a great example. I really don't care about that. I need XYZ deliverable. Somebody launches into a story about their divorce, or the nitty gritty details of a medical procedure they have had, or etc. They are oversharing to you. One up them with greater, more personal and comfortable story. Yep.
It's sort of like a woe is me sort of moment, that they're sort of shooting in your direction, right? Agree with everything they say. Yep. It's a strategy, right? Sometimes if you feel cornered, right, that might all that occurs to you to do.
Yeah. I don't have time for this. That would also make things worse.
Which is true, probably.
Yes.
Right.
And this is one of those situations where you can be technically true. Technically, this is that's true. You don't have time for this, but that's not helpful in this situation. Being passive aggressive about it, yep, that's not going to help things.
Yeah. So when we're talking about what not to do, and a lot of the suggestions that you have here are where you're sort of jumping to the end right away because you just want to be through this and to the conclusion. That's something that you want to avoid doing, because this person has their woe is me tale, but there's something that is motivating them to point it at you, that if you don't diffuse it, it's just going to keep going, or it's going to circle back to you later, or it's going to bite you somehow. So don't jump to the conclusion too quickly. Take a step back, take a breath, go, okay, what could I do? Don't expect to only experience positive emotions at work. I wrote this and I was like, who would write that? Who experiences only positive emotions at work? Not any of the places I've worked. But basically the idea there is that don't expect to never be uncomfortable, that you have to be comfortable with being uncomfortable sometimes, and that picking your battles about, whatever their woe is me tale is, that, some are worth just letting go and letting slide, and some you have to pick your battles and decide to intervene. So knowing where that line is for you is going to be important. don't let the conversation doom loop. This is the agreeing with everything that they say. You can get yourself, backed into a corner very easily if you just like let them sort of just verbally accost you with all of their woe is me tales, because it can go on and on and on and on, and you'll feel like you need somebody to tap you out and save you.
Yes, I have been in
Okay.
situations when I was in a different office situation, not this office, thankfully, where I had I had another coworker who would call me on the phone for no reason, but she would just call and be like, "Hi, it's very important that you come and help me with this email that I'm writing." I mean, and that would be my out of, I would be trapped in my office with somebody who was just unloading, and they would be able, I would be able to say, "Oh, geez, I really need to go help her. She really needs help with this email right now." And that also that's not a great way.
Actually, it's not bad to have an exit strategy in mind. Like if you have a person in your office that you know is likely to have this kind of behavior, be thinking about that. Do you have an exit strategy in mind where you could have something pre-planned? Because realistically, unfortunately, not everybody pays attention to social cues, and they might not be picking up what you're trying to do. Okay. So don't allow yourself to be held hostage, because you could be there a long time.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yes, I would have very much preferred to have a way to extricate myself rather than
Mhm.
be completely reliant, because it was something that happened on a fairly regular basis.
Mhm.
So having more tools than just relying on somebody else to tag me out
Yeah,
would be good.
yeah. And so one of the biggest things you want to keep in mind how to get out of it is to look at it like it's a movie plot, right? Where it has a beginning, a middle, and an end. So you don't want to jump to the end too soon, because then that will short circuit kind of what's happening. You want to figure out how to navigate your way through so that you have a strategy and you're retaining control of the conversation. Okay. Okay, and then some of these are very similar. Don't get used as a dumping ground, kind of like the same as don't allow yourself to be held hostage, right? You don't want to be at the mercy of somebody over disclosing that. If you don't feel comfortable with it, that's okay. You don't have to put up with it. You need to know where your own boundaries are. And we'll talk a little bit more later about how setting boundaries isn't necessarily all on you. Okay.
All right. Yeah. Our last pull the fire alarm seems,
Yeah.
that feels like maybe a drastic
Yeah.
move for this.
Yeah.
All right. So let's talk a little bit about that was our what not to do. Let's talk a little bit about what a good response would be. What are we talking about with how could we make this situation better?
So keep in mind that the good response here is a good response um, for me on a day where, I was writing out this scenario. So your good response needs to be tuned for you, your personality, right? Your tone, your character, those kinds of things. So this is a starting place for you. Sometimes, it depends on how you grew up, right? Either you had good examples of how to handle these things or you had rotten examples of how to handle these things, and nobody teaches us. So this is just a way for you to have starting ground, to give you some ways to initiate words if you don't have the words yourself. But by all means, make it your own. Okay. So one of the best things you can do is to anticipate what you will do if you get cornered. So think about that person, or, sort of the archetype of what that person is that we're talking about. What would you do if they came into your office today and, you needed something from them, unfortunately, and you were already cringing that you even had to ask them because you knew what was going to happen. So be thinking about how you would get out of it, how you would go through the beginning, the middle, and get to the end so that you weren't held hostage. So that's one of the biggest things, is you have to be thinking ahead, and then be listening. So when we talk about communication as one of the principles of good people skills, um, you're listening for a thread in what they're telling you that you can genuinely agree with. So everything, right? 99.9% of what they're saying might be totally alien to you. But if you can find just that little kernel of something that you have in common, it will seem genuine to them, and you'll be able to relate to them in a way where it can potentially diffuse what they're going on and on about. Okay.
So, Lori, before we move on, can you
Mhm.
talk a little bit about one of the suggestions as a bad suggestion was to one up the person?
Mhm.
And can you talk a little bit about like the difference between um relating to the person versus one-upping whatever their tale of woe
Sure.
might be.
No, that's a great thing that you're pointing out there, because wanting up means you're not listening to them. You're not using your communication skills. You're just dumping your own stuff back on them. Okay. So if you want to mirror what they're doing, that's going to get you into an interaction where they're just going to think you're somebody that they can do that with. And if you're okay with that, then that's good. But if you don't really want to get into these interactions in the future, finding a way to navigate your way through to the other side is going to be something that you have to have a strategy about. And wanting up them is more likely to antagonize them. Okay, well, you think that's bad. Let me tell you about what happened to me last weekend.
And
right?
then you just build and build
Mhm.
and build, and
Right.
yes.
It's really hard to extricate yourself out of those when you get the momentum going. Okay. Okay. So once you're listening for that thread and you come up with that thing that you genuinely can be like, oh man, that sounds horrible. I can understand why you would be upset about that. Um, you want to show them that you genuinely like they are pointing this at you because they feel unheard about something. So showing them that you are actually listening to them is going to help get you through it. And the one part though is trying to figure out how to listen at the same time as you're navigating through to make your exit. So thinking on your feet is going to be really important without looking like you're not listening. You know, that's one of the hardest things, to look like you're listening when you're listening, but it's a really, really challenging thing to do. And for whatever reason, I bring this up to my husband all the time. Not in my house. This would never happen. No, but look like you're listening when you're listening. Um, and I mean, it can be a strategy to, just ignore somebody, but that is not likely respectful. When we talked about that earlier, that a good response includes being respectful of the other person and being a little bit curious about what they're going through.
Yes, and this scenario is somebody that you are somewhat regularly interact with.
Mhm.
So it isn't, a bridge necessarily that you want to burn, where you are going to be um interpreted as being disrespectful. And also I will say
Mhm.
that the world that we are in the transportation infrastructure community is small.
Mhm.
So trying to make sure that we maintain as many good relationships as possible. You never know when that is going to benefit you in the future as well.
Right. So you can want to burn the bridge, but just don't show that outwardly. Okay. That sort of hold your own. This is where self-awareness comes in, where inside you can be like really ragingly upset, but on the outside, you look like you're listening. You are actively listening, and you're finding something that you have common ground with them about, so that you're showing them that you're listening. These are all the skills,
Mhm.
right? This is the skill part that comes in when it's challenging. And so one of the important things to keep in mind too is that you're not trying to win a battle. You're just trying to get yourself out of a situation. And if they're not paying attention to your social cues, you're going to need to be very deliberate about, um, okay, well, yeah, I can understand that that's hard for you. And then say, okay, I need that answer because I got to get back to my desk, or I have a meeting that I have to get to. You're going to have to close the conversation with a very direct and specific statement. Otherwise, they're going to be able to loop you back in, right? Or if you're waiting for them to close it, then don't even think that that's going to happen. You've probably been in those situations, right? You're going to have to be the one who keeps control of the conversation all the way through to the end so that you can extract yourself. Okay. So if that's what a good response looks like,
All right.
um,
What's our best
the
response
best
gonna be?
response, this is where I hinted a little bit about the setting boundaries isn't all on you as an individual. So the best response is going to be a systemic response. And let me explain what that means, because you're not a person alone in your office, the only person right in the office that has to put up with these kinds of people or these kinds of situations. You have a team, you have a culture, you have social norms that you're working with. And so a systemic solution is something where you anticipate intentionally, like, what do we want to do as a team? What do we want to do as an office if something like this happens in our workplace? If I notice that Ingrid is getting, sort of roped in or cornered in by somebody, and maybe we don't even have a plan in
Right.
advance. but I am paying attention and I notice, and she's my coworker and I care. And we've taken the time as a team to talk about these things in advance. We already will have a systemic solution in place, and I'll know what to do. And so that's why it's the best response. And it's often the one that is most neglected because people feel like this is all on them. Like they just have to figure it out alone. And that if they get cornered, it must be something they did.
Right, right. And I think oftentimes, sometimes people, they interpret it as them being like I'm too understanding, I'm too
Mhm.
empathetic, and I'm drawing this towards myself.
Mhm.
And I know I have felt that before where I was like, well, the solution to this is to be a harder person, to
Mhm.
be a less approachable person, because that will fix this. And
Mhm.
that's not also not the culture that you necessarily want um to because other people will also pick up on that of like, oh,
Mhm.
that person isn't approachable.
Mhm.
And I don't feel like I can share anything.
Yeah.
And that is the other piece of this, is that this isn't the situation isn't that like you never share anything personal about yourself ever in the workplace. It's just what happens when it's over the top, when
Yeah.
it crosses the line.
Yeah. So how do you know where that line is? How do you know where over disclosing starts?
Yeah.
And it really is dependent on the relationship that already exists with the person that you're talking to. And if that person didn't agree to receive sort of the emotional burden that you're spouting off, like we're having a conversation and Ingrid has no idea it's coming, right? She didn't agree. And so that's part of sort of the social norm. It's a social contract that gets negotiated between people who know each other pretty well. And if you don't know each other well enough, you're probably crossing that line if you're sharing something personal. Okay, so think about that. That if you're just meeting somebody or you just know somebody around the office, that you got to be careful not to cross that line with over disclosing, because you're putting that person in a really awkward situation. And I mean, but disclosing things is important.
Yes. Yes. It's how you build community, how you build rapport
It's
with other people.
how you build relationships.
Yes.
And this is one of the hardest things for people to figure out, that if they aren't able to acknowledge social cues accurately, they're going to keep sort of falling off into the deep end on this one. And everybody else seems to know,
Right.
but this poor unfortunate person doesn't seem to know.
Lori, do
Mhm.
you have any advice for folks who might recognize themselves right now as
Mhm.
an oversharer? Is there anything like that you could impart for them to maybe help them in the future?
Yeah. Yeah, if you think that you might have gone over the edge on this line, which I think everybody does sometimes, and you're gonna feel it right away.
I shouldn't have said that.
Okay.
That was too much.
And just recognize when that comes up in you and don't keep pushing past it. Recognize it if it feels like maybe, somebody gave you a weird look or it doesn't feel right or they're not responding back to you. Just maybe ask yourself, um, what what relationship am I in with this person, and is there some cue that you're missing? If it's a workplace interaction, the cues are going to be different than if it's a personal interaction. So all you can do is control yourself. You can't control what anybody else does. So if you're at risk of oversharing, you can tighten that up quite a bit. Um, but one of the things that Ingrid that you mentioned is important to note, that you don't want to totally shut down. Okay, so you don't want to swing from one extreme to the other. The idea is to be somewhere in the middle where you're balanced. About you share when it's healthy to share, when people are accepting, you have the rapport with them where you can, if they share, you share, right? There's reciprocity.
Hmm.
But if you're noticing that you're the only one that's ever sharing the personal stuff, that's a cue that you might be oversharing. Okay. Okay. So then, whose responsibility is it then to help the team decide what a boundary is in the office place? If you're a leader, if you're in a leadership role right now, it's on you. It really is. And anybody who isn't a leader, you can still do something. You just have to bring it to the person who has the ability to gather everybody in a room and sit down and say, what are some of these situations that we could anticipate being in? And how can we make sure that none of us are ever feeling like we're backed into a corner? Without having to pull the fire alarm.
Yeah.
Okay. And so you're going to want to look at it from that systemic perspective, from a group, that it's on all of us to figure this out. And then having some good conversations about, what's happening in our office and what's making people feel uncomfortable, and where do we want to maybe draw up some ground rules about how things work for us as a team. And as the leader, you don't have to accept every suggestion. Like, there might be some crazy things that people say that bother them, but all in all, it's not necessarily something that needs to go. Like, you're not writing, civil litigation out where you
Right.
have to follow every single detail. You just want to figure out what somebody with common sense, right, on your team would make sense to keep everybody feeling like they can say, hey, I need to get back to work, and we agreed to not have these kinds of conversations. And it's not an unknown thing then to the other person. It's not
Right.
like they feel singled out then, because everybody on the team knows that they've agreed. That could be hard for that one person, even
Yeah.
though if they might already be singled out by the team, it can be hard for them to warm up to the idea that they are over disclosing. Okay. So then once you have that conversation and you draft a list of items that can help you, getting everybody to buy into it is the big part. So getting that input all at the same time, and then having everybody kind of sign and agree is an important step. So if I'm sitting in on the team meeting and everybody else agrees to all of these things, that we're going to do this and we're not going to do that, and we're not going to allow some of these people to say these kinds of things in our office, but there's one person who isn't, use positive peer pressure, right? This is where peer pressure works for you, is that it will make it clear to people that maybe don't know those cues yet, that that's what you expect of them, but without pointing them out and putting the spotlight on them.
Yeah, and this is like we talked about a little bit earlier with some of those social norms. Social norms are learned behaviors
Mhm.
and they differ between, workplaces, between, your social norms at home versus your social norms at work might be very different. Microwaving fish in your own microwave at home. Okay, microwaving fish in the office break room where there's an open area, you might get some pushback on that one.
Yep.
Those there are definitely some things. So this is, it's something that's teachable and something that's learnable when we're talking about these new social norms.
Yeah, and nobody's going to be able to read your mind on these things. So if something's bothering you, having a conversation as a team about where you can all put it out there and say, yeah, these are the things that we want for our office. We want it to be this way. It can build the team up. It can be a team building experience. And then it can also minimize those interactions that we're talking about that are difficult, that waste time, that make you feel like, why am I even here? This is like agony. That can give you a way to get out of those a little bit easier, because you've already agreed. You've
Mm.
already agreed on how we're not going to do those things. Okay. And then I guess one of the other things that we have on there is that what are the consequences for not following these guidelines? So if everybody signs off on it on the team, and you have somebody that comes from outside, that might be a contractor, and they don't know, they don't follow these rules, right? That's where everybody has to have a conversation about, what would you do? What would you do if so-and-so comes in from outside and they don't know our rules? That needs to be part of the conversation. So how would you handle it? Talk it through. Have some time to figure this out as a group while you're anticipating before you get stuck in the situation. And then you'll be able to draft some situations where you can figure out how to communicate about it. Okay. And if we're talking about communication, then we have to talk about dependability. So when you're all signing off on the agreement, who's going to honor it? Who isn't going to honor it? What happens to somebody on your team if they don't honor it? Use that peer pressure. And then if self-awareness is the last part of people skills, as a principal, where do you fall on all of this? Where are you in being able to acknowledge if you're over disclosing, if you're the person who's interrupting people, if you're the person who's totally shut down and you're not socializing at all, that can be a problem on a team just as much. So figure out where you fall on this and how to navigate through it, with the mix of communication, dependability, and acknowledging what's your part in the whole situation. We forget that part most
Yes.
of the time.
Yes, I think very much so.
that people skills that you have to have some awareness about what your baggage is that you're bringing to work,
Yes.
right?
Yes, and sometimes it can be, depending on how many workplaces you've been in, you may have had bad experiences before
Mhm.
that make you feel like maybe you don't want to share, or maybe you go into a workplace feeling more closed off because you've had bad experiences before, or you have been put in awkward situations before as well. So having that, I think going way back to the beginning with some of that empathy is approaching things with some neutrality, that this is a new workplace, or this is even every day is a new day, so
Mhm.
things can change and can get better. And I think also having some charitability, that the people around you also are working on these same things too.
Yeah.
We're all trying to be hopefully trying to be better with some of these skills.
Yeah. And that's a good reminder too for if somebody violates one of your new systemic rules, right? And you have to as a team intervene to save one of your coworkers, right? Figuring out how to have a path back for that person that still respects them so that they can learn that they're not, going to be isolated all the time, like that they don't know what's going on. Try and figure out a way to give them a path back where they can save face, but they can also learn the new norms that you're trying to set in your office.
Yes. And then the last point for this, for folks who maybe aren't in a leadership role, some um expertise for what they can and can't maybe expect if they are trying to make some changes within their office.
Mhm.
If maybe you don't have some of this buy-in from a leadership position, and you don't have some of that
Mhm.
authority, what are some things that you can do, and maybe managing some of your expectations about how things might change?
Yeah. You can be a team of one or you can be a team of 50, right? That this is going to work down to as small a group as you need. So if everybody fails you on your team and you're the only one that's willing to, approach things from being a better communicator, trying to figure out how to be as dependable as possible, and trying to figure out how to make things work from understanding your part in it, um, that's all you can control. So pick your battles, right? Know that if you're not in a situation or in a role where you have authority to pull people into a room, it doesn't mean you can't influence them. That you might have some influence with your coworkers and you might be able to have a conversation with one or two people. Start there. And you never know what it can grow into. It can grow into a systemic solution.
Awesome. All right, so we are almost at the top of the hour. We want to thank you all for attending today's session. I'm going to put the link here for the SurveyMonkey. That will be how you get your certificate of attendance for today's session. If you have any questions about anything, you can feel free to put it in the chat. Lori and I are going to hang out here for a few minutes so that you're able to grab that SurveyMonkey link and fill it out. I encourage you to try and fill it out right now. So in case you have any issues, we can hopefully handle those for you. But we do want to thank you so much
Mhm.
for joining us today. And hopefully you were able to learn some things and take some good takeaways away. We want to remind you too about that YouTube page with the other scenarios. There was an aggressive customer coming in, and then the other one was a manager and employee scenario. So we will you will have those to also check out. We talk for about a half an hour with those ones as
Mhm.
well, going through those scenarios. So, Lori, do you have any other closing thoughts?
I just reflect on your own ability uh, for now that people skills aren't mystical and magical anymore, right? If you pick one thing, are you going to pick something about how you communicate? Are you going to pick about how dependable you are? Or are you going to look at your own self-awareness? Just look at that, pick one thing, and see if you can work on it for the rest of the day.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Lori.
Yeah,
This
thank
has
you.
been awesome. Thank you guys for attending today. Like I said, if you grab that SurveyMonkey link and everything's working out great for you, you're free to go for today's session. We really do appreciate that you guys have sat in today. I do have a session tomorrow where I'm going to be talking about effective meetings. That one you can still sign up for today. And like I said, there are some other YouTube videos that are on our YouTube page about some train the trainer and some of the previous effective meetings if you can't make tomorrow's session. So thank you again so much. We hope that you've enjoyed today's session. We hope that you join us again in the future. In that SurveyMonkey link, you also have the ability to make some suggestions about maybe some other topics that you might like to hear about from us. So please let us know. We're always eager to hear. And yeah, thank you again so much. We'll hang out here for another 5 minutes or so while you get that link and get it filled out. But thanks so much, everyone, and we hope to see you again in the future.
Thank you.
Hi, folks. So if you are still in the room, oh, we've got a question here. Let me drop the survey link in the chat again. Um, the In order to get the certificate of attendance for today's session, you got to fill out that SurveyMonkey link that is in the chat right now. It will start off with a few questions that are kind of evaluation questions, and then it will get into the certificate of attendance questions. So if you've got that link and you're filling the survey out, then you're free to go. You can exit the room. If you're still having some trouble, let me know. We'll hang out here for another 5 minutes or so. If you have gotten the link, thank you so much. We'll hope to see you at another training. You're free to take off. I appreciate that you spent your lunch hour with us. Oh, let's see, Casey, can't hear. Let's see, Casey, let me type in the chat for you. So for those of you who are still here, that certificate of attendance will take a few days to process. It might take up to a week or maybe a little bit more depending on how things are getting processed through the system here at CTT. We are going to be off for a good chunk of next week. So just in case you are expecting to get it immediately, it will take a couple of days at a minimum. All right, folks, like I said, we'll hang out here for another 10 minutes or 5 minutes or so if you have any trouble. Going to stop the recording though.